U.S. Supreme Court at a critical moment right now. The 9 justices weighing politically explosive issues like abortion and Donald Trump's claims of presidential immunity amid declining public trust in the institution and questions about its future. And joining me now, the retired United States Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer. He's the author of a very important and powerful brand new book entitled Reading the Constitution, Why I Chose Pragmatism, Not Textualism. Justice Breyer, thank you very much for joining us. I want to discuss your book. We're going to get to that. But among other things, you've said that on its current path right now, the Supreme Court is producing, and these are your words, a constitution that no one wants. What are the implications of that for the country?
Well, that's not a good implication for the country. And where I say that frequently was Nino Scalia and I used to discuss in public the differences in our approach to the Constitution.
I remember.
And statutes too. And he would say, I have too complicated a system. Only you, Stephen, can do it. And then I'd say to him, but if we follow you, Nino, we'll have a Constitution that no one would want.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. So you're sticking by those words, that we're producing a Constitution that no one wants.
Well, if you follow, now, not everybody knows what this word textualism means. Much less originalism.
What does it mean?
What does it mean? It means when you look at a statute, you see some words. When you look at this document, the Constitution, there are more words. That's what lawyers do. They look at words. And sometimes those words are not clear as to how they apply, and then the case might get to the Supreme Court. And how will you decide what those words mean, how they apply? A textualist or an originalist says, I'll tell you how. Go read them. Read them and don't look at much else. Just read those words. Read them twice, 3 times. So I say, yeah, I have a word called costs, in the statute. This word says costs. And does it apply to an educational expert too or not? Read it 10 times. You know what it'll say the 10th time?
Cost.
Correct. Yeah. Cost.
All right.
That's right.
Let's talk a little bit about, you retired at the end of the Supreme Court session of 2022.
That's right.
Of the Dobbs decision, and you were there, that overturned Roe versus Wade, you wrote this, so let me read it to you. None of the traditional considerations that had led the court to overrule prior precedent could justify its decision in Dobbs. Changes in the facts supported rather than undermined Roe and Casey. So how damaging has this been, you believe, this decision, this so-called Dobbs decision, to the credibility of the Supreme Court?
I don't know to the credibility because you are the expert there. I have my own ideas, but
You're
it's
an
the
expert.
Well, I am a member of this. I was a member of the Supreme Court, but we wrote a long dissent. Who? Justice Kagan, Justice Sotomayor, and myself, and that dissent together said this would be very harmful. The majority thinks it's going to turn the whole issue over to the legislatures of states, and we'll never have to deal with it again. Oh, really? We said, is that true? Well, this morning, I think, or yesterday morning, wasn't it? They dealt with a big issue, and there will be more and more and more. And we wrote all of that.
Because of the Dobbs decision.
Yes. We wrote that and said this is
Roe
not
versus
going to
Wade.
work well. This is not going to work well, and we explained it.
So are you worried about the court's credibility?
I'm worried in this sense, yes. Yes and no. Good question. Why? If you, not you, but someone, were on trial, and suppose that person was very unpopular, that's why I say it's not you, very unpopular, would that person want a judge who is going to decide according to public opinion? No. Well, that's true, but in the long run, public opinion matters because public opinion is one of the things that will lead people to follow a rule of law.
And I want to follow up on that. But you've also said that if the court overturns too many decisions, in your words, it could lead to legal chaos. Do you think that's the path that we're all heading on?
No. But I think what will happen there is this. The people who have textualism, originalism.
The conservative justices.
Yes, and as it turns out. But they say one of the problems with the way I approach the Constitution, maybe you would, is that one of the problems is it lets a judge substitute what he thinks is good for the law. And I say, oh really, read Dobbs. How did you pick out Roe v. Wade to overturn? Are you going to overturn every case that doesn't decide by a theory of textualism? That's the question you ask. And the answer to that is no, of course not, because that would lead to a country without laws. But how do you decide? Perhaps you decide on the ground you think that's a really wrong case. Well, then what are you criticizing the other side for?
Yeah.
Both sides have that problem.
As you know, the American public has soured on the Supreme Court, at least in recent years. I'll put some numbers up on the screen. In 2020, nearly 2/3 of Americans approved of the Supreme Court, but since then, approval for the court has plummeted, now standing at just 40%. Are you concerned about this declining public opinion support for the Supreme Court?
Remember, there were two halves. You want judges who will not decide according to what the public approves or disapproves. On the other hand, and the person who said this very well was Professor Paul Freund at Harvard years ago. He said, no judge will decide a case according to the political temperature of the day, but every judge will take account of the climate of the era. Now, you get too much, too opposed to what the courts are doing, and you will discover weaknesses in the rule of law itself. Because the rule of law itself means you and others and me will have to sometimes follow cases that they think are wrong. If you don't have that attitude in the country, you don't have a rule of law. And that, I think, would be unfortunate.
I want to get to a huge issue that's before the Supreme Court
Yes.
right now. The justices, as you know, are going to hear presidential immunity arguments, the case that Trump is putting forward. He says he has presidential immunity and should not be tried. They could have taken this up back in December, but they didn't. Why do you think they delayed this until now? Are they afraid? You think they're afraid of Trump?
I don't like to criticize any question, but there are certain questions I really can't go into.
I know.
Because I am a retired justice, and I don't want to be a 10th justice telling other people what to do.
The American public would love to hear your thoughts on presidential
they
immunity
might.
on this case, which is such a significant case before the Supreme Court.
They might, but it is in the area where I feel I can't go into.
It's because it would be inappropriate.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
You retired from the Supreme Court at the end of the 2022 session. Should other justices, do you believe, and I hope you can answer this question, should other justices follow your example and step aside from the court so it doesn't necessarily tilt further to the right?
It's very much a personal decision, and it's a difficult decision. And people all over this country who've reached the age where it's possible that retirement is in the sights will have to make that decision. And I can't say more than it's a personal decision. Would I think that the makeup of the court might feed in there as one of the factors? It might for me, but it's about me.
Why did you decide to retire when you did?
I did. I was 83 years old. I was getting on. There were a lot of, you want to give chances to other people. You want to take into account to some degree what's happening and what the court might look like in the future. What's your family situation? What about your grandchildren? What about?
So you thought about all that. and you
Oh
made
my
it.
goodness, how do you think about decisions that affect you personally?
It's not just you personally, it's the country. There's such a powerful and important position on the United States Supreme Court. Let me just wrap this up because I know you got to go. What do you hope your legacy will be as far as the American judicial system is concerned?
I can't do better than say what Sandra O'Connor told me when Thurgood Marshall and she were discussing that question. He was a little gloomy. He said, I don't know if I've really accomplished anything. Sandra said, my goodness, Thurgood, you've accomplished more than I think anybody on this court has accomplished. What is your legacy going to be? He said, I know what I'd like it to be. I'm guessing from what I've heard. He said, he tried. He tried. That's the virtue of that job. It gives you a chance to do your best. It's not the applause. I was told by a president, hey, the applause dies very rapidly, and then you're left with the job. And the virtue of that job is it requires you to forget about yourself. You know what Ken Galbraith said when he was ambassador to India? He'd been ambassador, and one of his colleagues said, yes, interesting, Ken. And he said, you know, it was so interesting, I found I didn't think about myself for seconds at a time. That's it. And
All
you
right,
better-
the book is entitled Reading the Constitution, Why I Chose Pragmatism, Not